Buried deep in the lineage of David, there is a man marked for life by his name. A man who thousands of years later would rise from obscurity because of a humble, heartfelt prayer. Experience God's blessing for your life. The prayer of Jabez.
I want you to look at this passage, 1 Timothy chapter 6. Look at it carefully in your workbook. But those who desire to be rich, look at those words. Those desire to be rich fall into something. They fall into temptation and the snare. And they fall into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. That's what we're talking about, evil. For which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. What a profound passage. This is such a test. Who's that letter of 1 Timothy written to? A pastor. It's to a pastor. It's by Paul to Timothy, saying, Timothy, be careful about your love of money, of wanting more and more things. Why? Because you will fall into a whole bunch of temptations you didn't have before. If you didn't have a love of money, you wouldn't be tempted in all these ways. But if you do, let your heart get that love of money, the love of wealth, the love of more and big and better all of the time. You will, this is one of the most dramatic word pictures in the New Testament. You will take up a spear and you will pierce yourself through. That's what it says. They pierce themselves through. How does this work? And why is it in the Jabez life? It's in the Jabez life because as God begins to use you more and more and more, not always, but sometimes money comes your way. It's amazing. It just comes your way. And it's really a test from God about can you be trusted with the money or not? Will you change your mind and make money as your primary motive, or is serving God your primary motive? I remember years ago, Darlene and I were in California at a conference, and I had spoken that morning, and we went back to the hotel. The hotel was had a big cover in the middle and a big atrium, and we were holding hands walking through the middle of this, talking together, and there were these tables with these umbrellas over it, and there was a couple that I didn't know. As we walked through this way, they were right here. And we started walking, and they called us back over, and I came over, and he said, oh, you need to come to my church and give that talk to our church. I said, well, fine, just write me a letter. No, I mean, really, you need to come. Thank you, just write me a letter. No, I'll tell you what, we'll give you a big honorarium. Thank you, just write me a letter. No, we'll give you $5,000. Write me a letter. No, I want you to really come. Then she looked at Darlene and said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you the $5,000, and you and your wife, I'll give us a week's free vacation in Hawaii. And I looked at him and I said, you know, sir, do you know what you're saying to me? That my motive to come to you is that if you pay me enough, then that's why I'll come. I said, if that was my motive, would you want me to come? Don't write me a letter. And I left. 6, 7, 8 months later, I was back where this man had a big church. And I was preaching in a different church. And I asked the man in this church about that man, because I didn't know him. He said, it's a sad story. A couple weeks ago, he was arrested because of what he did with money and some investments with money from the church, and they may put him in prison. And I thought to myself, what was that man trying to motivate me to do? That which motivated him to do. What motivated him to do is give me more money and I'll do it. The truth of it is, don't be motivated to serve God on the basis of money. It happened to me last week. South of the airport, I was speaking at a meeting. And a man came up and said, did you get my invitation to come speak at our I said, sure. Are you going to be able to do it? No, my schedule is so full, I really don't want to do it. Do you understand how much the honorarium is? I said, yes, sir, that's a very, very large honorarium. He said, well, aren't you going to take it? I said, really, no, that's not why I take speaking engagements. And he had this stunned look. And I found years ago, never ask how much anything is going to come to you. And never once make any decision in ministry based upon what you get. Be careful. So many people in ministry get tricked up in this whole issue, and they die inside over the years. Next is the biggest one. Pray, keep me from evil due to the temptation of pleasure. Of pleasure. I don't mean good pleasure, I mean sinful pleasure. Put the word lust after this. Put the word immorality next to this. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Now the body is not for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. Flee sexual immorality. Why do I include this? This is the number one reason why men and women whose God's arm is using in a powerful way end up in the ditch. Number one. Put all the other four put together, this is bigger. This is larger. Why does this happen this way? I can only offer you a suggestion. There's two sides to it. One side of it is, as God uses you more and more, certain people are attracted to power of the opposite sex. Some men are attracted to women who have power, and women are attracted to men of power. That's what you can see in Washington, D.C. so much immorality. And secondly, somehow, when power comes, the fleshly side of you is raised in some way, and the desire for immorality is a stronger temptation. And the third thing, it appears to me that Satan comes really against a man or a woman in sexual temptations very hard from time to time. I want you to realize this can happen to anybody, and it can happen to you. And there never is an announcement, you know, tomorrow at 4 o'clock, the temptation is coming, watch out. It never shows up like this. It never does. I was eating dinner with a man, you would know his name. We were having a Mexican restaurant in Southern California. He said, Bruce, let me tell you what happened last weekend when I was at the conference speaking. I said, what happened? He says, well, I got in the night before and I was late and I had 2 bags. I checked in and I was away from home for a week, and I got into the elevator and I put my bags down. He said, just before the doors closed, 2 beautiful young ladies, he was in his early 60s, came right in and stood on either side. I said, you are kidding. He said, no. Then they each took one of my arms and said to me, come on, big boy, let's spend the night. I said, you're kidding me. If I told you his name, you'd burst out laughing. I said, what'd you do? He says, well, it caught me off guard. Here I am in my 60s. And then he said, I said to myself, these are very attractive ladies. I thought, maybe I should witness to them. And he turned to them, he said, ladies, I am happily married, and I belong to Christ, and we will not be doing anything like this. And then he starts laughing. He's telling me this, and he has a great laugh. And he said, and then I told him, ladies, you made my night, man. Just think about this. I'm in my 60s, and you're beautiful, and you did this to me? He said, you made my night. Just kind of a man-to-man talk for a moment there. You know it, you never know it. Never know it. I asked a young man I've been discipling for years, I said, how you doing in this temptation? How you doing in your hotel room? How you doing when the pornography's right there and nobody will ever know? What are you doing with that? When's the last time you did that? Did you do that? When's the last time? How tempted are you? Why? That's the way life is. And he said, you know, the other day I was in a hotel and a woman came right up to me. I was seated there for lunch, came right up to me, sat down at my table and said, I want to have sex with you. He's in his young 30s. I said, how'd you do? He said, oh, I had never idea how hard that was going to be. I am faithful to my wife, but at that moment, I didn't want to think of my wife. This temptation's real. And the more God uses you, the more you better watch out and be like Joseph. When Potiphar's wife went after him, he said no and just said, take my jacket and hold on, and just ran away. Flee temptation. And letter E, pray, keep me from evil due to the temptation of position. I believe this was the disciples' #1 temptation. Why? They're always arguing about who's going to be the greatest and who's going to sit on the right hand and who's going to sit on the left hand. What is that? That's position. I want to be the chief person. You can be the second chief person. Watch out in that area. Now let's move down to the practical steps for the Jabez, keep me from evil. #1, expect temptations, especially as your territory increases. Expect temptations, especially as your territory increases. V, void the sin, which so easily ensnares you. Void the sin, nullify it, end it. Get rid of the sin which seems to be after you all the time. Because once you do, God's hand will come upon you much more. I, invite the Spirit to fill you with His presence and power. Invite the Spirit to fill you with His presence and power. And lastly, learn to stand in the power of God's might. You know, right before we came here, Darlene and I were in the back room here talking over lunch. And we were remembering some of the times that Satan came against our family. And we were reminding each other of time after time and how God came through and how painful some of it was. And the truth of it is, you must learn how to do this not from books. You learn how to do this by doing it. And you don't learn back here, my friends, because you're out of the battle. You learned over here. And I've said some sobering comments about that, but I want to underline everything. Christ is stronger than anything that comes against you at any time. And you need to be willing to become a warrior for Him and take up the shield and the sword and the helmet and the breastplate and fight. Fight to stand. And you'll know when the fight's gone because it'll be over. Just stay standing. And if you fall to one knee, call one of your best friends and say, I'm falling. Pray for me. You're meant to stand. So what are the potential results then that could take place? #1, you'll become more sensitive to evil and grow in holiness. You'll become more sensitive to evil and grow in holiness. #2, you will experience that the Lord is able to keep you from sin. C, you will not cause pain, but joy to others, yourself, and to God. You will bring joy to God. You know, this whole issue of evil, the majority of you who are watching this right now, if the truth were known, if you and I could sit down, the majority of us are trapped in sin right this minute. And we've been talking about it as if sin is in front of us, where it's my experience that most of us are trapped in it. And this is such a delightful thought, but it's not true about you yet. The truth of it is, unless you get free, then all of this will just be information that never is a part of your life. And no matter what it is that's trapped you, you must get free from it. And God's power, not only Christ's death on the cross broke the penalty for your sin, but it also broke the power of the sin over you. And you and I don't have to commit that sin. I remember speaking to a group of about 800 men in the middle of the wilderness up in the Northwest. There were 800 men. There wasn't a lady there. We're there for the weekend. Nobody took a shower. Nobody shaved. It was just great. And on Saturday night, we were in this open air thing. There was no walls. There was only a roof, and the wooden bleachers, they felt like 100 years old. Just the guys were there. And I decided to speak to them about this #1 sin, sexual immorality. Because I felt in the room that many of those men were trapped. And no matter how much they wanted to do for God, it was not going to happen. So at the end, after speaking about that, I came down to the gravel on the floor here. And I said to them, you know, some of you in this room are having an adulterous affair right now. Some of you are married and committing adultery, having sex with somebody else. Some of you aren't married and you're having sex with somebody else. I said, that is sin. And you're to stop that. And you're to stop it tonight. You must put your line in the sand and say, this is enough, Lord, forgive me, and then move on and stop. I said, you know, some of you need to take a quarter and go over to that telephone pole right over there. There was one phone in this part of the conference center on a tall pole with a light on it. You couldn't see it, but you could see the bottom half of it through the open area. And I said to these men, so you need to take a quarter, go put it in that telephone and call that lady that you're having an adulterous affair with and end it tonight. And say, you know, I have sinned against you because I've broken my vows with my spouse. I've sinned against you and my sin against you, and I've sinned against God, and I apologize. I am sorry. Please forgive me. But I will never again call you. I will never write you. I will never read or open the letter you send, and you'll never hear from me again. You need to end it. So that'll be probably the hardest telephone call you'll ever make, because some of you love the other woman, and you stop loving your wife. But from God's point of view, stop. And God will give you back the love for your wife. And I said to the men, you know, what I want you to do is I want you to stand up wherever you may be in this room, this auditorium, and walk right down the middle, shake my hand, and look me in the eye and say, I'm going to end it tonight, and then go call. I said, if you can't do that in front of all of us, I guarantee you one thing, you won't call the lady. Well, it got real quiet, because nobody had their heads bowed. There was no choir singing, just a bunch of guys. But you know, when just a bunch of men together, you can be honest. And we were honest that whole weekend. And my heart was pounding. I was saying, Lord, show up. And off here, on about the third from the top, was a great big man who stood up and was so quiet, we heard his knees pop. And he had big boots on. He walked across, and I was standing right here. And he walked down that middle row, and his eyes never left me. And I thought to myself, this man is going to punch me. And he came right here. He's, I'm a trucker. I said, yes, sir, you are. He says, I've been having one of those adulterous affairs for 9 years. I didn't know God was that much against it. That I'm going to stop tonight. So I put up my hand. He went right past my hand. He put his arms around me, lifted me off the ground, popped my back in 5 places, let me down, and we all watched and heard the gravel on his boots. As he walked over, walked up the side, we saw the bottom half of his legs across there, and we actually heard the quarter hit the bottom. And then I stood there, and then man after man after man came. And lives were changed. 2 o'clock in the morning, in my little cabin over here, I looked out that window with the spider webs right there. I looked out, and there was still a line of men. I want you to know, no matter what it is that you're stuck in, God wants you free. And no matter how hard it may seem, God will come through. And if you can't get free on your own, just go see your pastor or somebody else who's not stuck in that sin, and just end it, so that God can come through for you. Well, these have been amazing 8 sessions together. I have many emotions as I stand here. First of all, such a gratitude in my heart for what God has done for me as an individual. That I'm unworthy and undeserving of all of this. But it's been such an exciting time to ride with God. It's almost like in the earlier days I would read about his chariot going across. And then I kept saying, Lord, I don't want to hear about it anymore. And God says, well, then come on over to where my chariot is. And as I stood there, his chariot came along and grabbed my coat in the spoke. And it's been the ride of Jabez ever since. And you know, it's been my observation that there's not enough giants in the land for God. There's not enough men, not enough women, not enough young people who really want the hand of God upon them in a mighty way. And it's my prayer to you that this course will have opened your heart and your eyes to a whole other kind of a life, and that your heart will beat like mine. Lord, please. I don't want to come to the end of my life and have you usher me into heaven and realize, here's what you had planned for me, but I never gave you a chance. God's inviting you. He brought you to this series, and now at this moment, He's waiting for a decision from you. Because God is a gentleman, if you can say it that way. He invites. He never pushes. And as I think about what verse in all of the Bible should we close with, the one that meets me the most is when Isaiah saw the Lord high and lifted up, and the seraphim around were saying, "Holy, holy, holy Lord God Almighty." And then you hear God saying, who can we, watch this, who can we send? Who will go for us? I love what happens next. Isaiah holds his hand up and says, "Here am I, Lord. Please send me." And isn't that the whole heart of what we've been saying for 8 sessions? Please send me. And don't send me a little bit. Send me a lot. And don't let me go by myself. Please come with me. And don't take your hand off of me. If anything, put both hands on me. And please keep me away from evil. I don't want this to end. And you know, it comes a point in an adult's life that they understand what this is all about. And it's not really emotional, it's something deeper than emotions. It's inside of your spirit. When you make a decision that this is the life I am going to live, and I don't care what it costs, I don't care how hard it is, I don't care how much I have to learn, I don't care what I have to give up so that I can gain what He wants to give me. This will be my life until I die. That's what I'm hoping will happen to a group of people across the face of the earth who rise up and be Davids with Goliaths again, and be Pauls, and be Esthers, and be Ruths, and be Nehemiahs, be men and women like in Hebrews chapter 11, men and women mighty in faith before God. And I want to invite you to think about what you should do. Some of you don't want to do this, and I understand, but some of you do. And I'm going to invite this auditorium right here, because God has been with us in these 8 sessions. And I censor some of you in this room, and maybe if you're watching me, maybe you're one of them as well. And if some of you here sense that this is God's call in your life, and there needs to be a change, a great big change, not an emotional decision, a deep change, that you're going to live this way. You're going to beg God, bless me indeed. Enlarge my ministry for you. Put your hand upon me and keep me from evil. And Lord, I'm not going to stop praying it till I see you. Till I see you. Then I believe it's time to make a moment in time in which everything changes. Because that's how it happens with me. I make a decision. After thinking about it, I make it, and my life changes because of it. And I believe it's time that for some of you. This isn't a course just to hear. This is a course that can change your life. But now it comes down to a decision from you. What are you going to do? And I'm going to ask those of you in this room, if you're one of those people that you know, this is why I was here. I thought I'd just be a part of this taping, but in reality, I'm here because of what God has asked me to do and to be. And I am going to make a change. And by God's grace, my life will never be the same. Then I want to just shake your hand. I do. I just want to shake your hand and meet you. And then I want you to stand behind me. So in a minute, I'm going to invite these folks here. And if you're watching and you want to be a part of that, just where you are, even if you're by yourself in your room, just stand to your feet and take a stand for this and join us. So on behalf of all of us, as we close this, and as these folks have their own moment, Thanks for being a part of the Jabez miracle. When I meet you someday, maybe you can come up and say, you know, I took the Jabez challenge and my life has never been the same.